In my life, I have studied many different languages, from ancient Hebrew to English to African languages as well. And one thing I've realized is that these languages and the words and the grammar that we can identify and categorize is not always as important as the language that we actually speak. The words we use and the words we don't use. The themes that pop up in our conversations and those themes that are kind of ignored or that you're not really supposed to talk about. There are always some kind of rules, unspoken rules often, that are present in a group when there's a meeting or a conversation or just even you talking to yourself. And as I've read some great books by Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, I've realized that as great as our languages are, they cannot always express the inner voices that we have. Language can do a lot, and it can create so much in the sense that even when someone speaks, like in a speech or a sermon, they can create a feeling inside of you. They can create worlds with their words and with their stories. But on the other hand, there are some things or some feelings that we cannot quite express. And this dilemma, I see it as, definitely points towards what kind of beings we are. It shows that in us there's still some kind of animal or something animalistic that is still present. Obviously, the fact that we want to eat to survive, or we have to eat to survive, and that we want to find safety amongst other people, that we want to mate with other people, these kind of things are something animals do as well, of course. But what might actually distinguish us from animals is the high level of communication that we have. Our language, of course. Our language actually sets us apart from most other animals, although other animals definitely communicate as well. I have seen elephants in real life communicating with each other, definitely, and they make rumbling sounds that we as human beings can't even hear, but that are definitely intelligent ways of communicating. Nevertheless, as human beings, we have these languages or language itself as an effective means of communication. But this means of communication has developed so far that sometimes we can use words and grammar and structures of language that do not, or that are actually far removed from our experience. In the sense that we can think of such abstract ideas that they are really distant from anything that we see in reality, or anything that we can touch and hear and see with our physical senses. Of course, that's one topic that is heavily debated or has been heavily debated in philosophy. Plato came up with a very interesting idea that language, or the fact that we have these ideas in our language, means that there is an ideal realm. And although it's quite logical or in the materialistic sense, it's logical to think, well, of course there's not a spiritual realm or another world that is ideal or something like that. But somehow this idea of Plato always just kept on coming back into discussions. Until, of course, there was also this movement of the philosophy of language, where we realized how complex and complicated our languages are. Not just the cultural languages, but really every word and every little sound that we make has a reason, or has a reasoning behind it, a structure, a logic behind it. But that means that often when, at least in my experience, when I try to express my feelings, it's not actually that easy. Because in many ways I've been indoctrinated, or I've only been given certain kinds of words and certain kinds of sentences and stories and visions to describe what I experience. And it may be, I think, especially in an academic world, that our language has become so distant from the true experiences of people that that language that we use in the academic setting doesn't actually in any way touch our hearts or touch some kind of sense or central part of us. So things like music, of course, touch us in a very different way. And sports or physical activity, all those kind of things have an influence on us. But the important thing I want to convey from all of these things that I've picked up is that we have sometimes, I think, accepted certain kinds of languages and ways of speaking and communicating that aren't necessarily good for us. We accept the way that people talk in a certain community or a friend group, like when they insult each other a lot or they lie to each other, and they use certain words that are actually ugly words. Well, it actually has more of an effect on us than we might think at first. And also, sometimes it might help actually just to get below the language, or below the level of language. To understand yourself, you need to kind of forget some of the language or some of the words that you have been using to talk to yourself or to describe yourself. And that's why I think also a writer like Nietzsche wrote about animals, or the human being is something between an animal and a higher human being, or the higher version of ourselves. There's that high ideal that we can reach as human beings, but at the same time we shouldn't try and go so high that we forget where we come from, basically. We shouldn't forget what we are actually. I am a body. I am a body with hands and feet and lips and eyes that exists and that lives, most definitely. And to get into touch with your own body is probably the good start of getting in touch with yourself and eventually getting in touch with your own greater soul, your own greater self. And I don't mean that as someone who knows a lot. I just mean that as someone who's wrestled with this a little bit and read a lot about it. And now I'm starting to gather up all these different ideas. And I think this is an important idea, that we have to sometimes take a step back and take a step down to feel what we are really feeling and to think what we are really thinking.